Okay, so welcome to class, everybody. We're going to continue our discussion of the Ten Commandments. Last time we just did an overview of the kind of the historical context and an overview of the Ten Commandments themselves as God's will, the different functions, and so forth. Does anyone have any questions about any of that stuff that we talked about? Okie dokie. So we'll dive into the first commandment itself. That is going to be an entirely useless pencil. Okay, so what I want us to do is to read it together in unison. Okay. The first commandment, you shall have no other gods. What does this mean? We should fear, love, and trust in God above all things. Okay, so with this commandment, first and the most important commandment, we need to define lots of our terminology as always. So I think probably the most helpful thing is when we say gods, keep in mind the lowercase g gods, what does God mean? There are two definitions. The first, this is kind of the biblical definition of God. This is why our God gets to claim to be God, rightfully so, is you are the creator. So if you created everything that there is, you get to claim to be God. If you didn't create everything that there is, you don't get to claim to be God. That's the argument that the Old Testament prophets make for why those idols are not, in fact, gods, because they themselves, not only did they not make everything, they didn't even make themselves. They were made by human hands. The other one is a much more nuanced one, right? So when you look at this, you go, well, yeah, of course I don't have any other gods. I'm not worshiping Baal, right? I'm not bowing down at the altar of Zeus or Odin or whoever people worship these days, or Buddha or anything like that. So, but God's also has kind of a more subtle nuance to it. Luther picks this up in the Large Catechism in an absolute brilliant line where he says, basically, a God is that which you trust. So a God is the thing that you say, when things go bad, this is the thing you turn to give you comfort, hope, security. It's the thing that when you say, as long as I have insert, whatever, then I'll be okay.
Like idols.
Right. So false god is an idol, right? So you can either have the true God or an idol. Okay, an idol is specifically like an image, like a statue, but we use it more figuratively most of the time when we talk about something that we're having in our hearts that we put our trust in, we build our identity around. So could be identity, kind of falls in there as well. And what else might we say? That which you trust, the true God. So what would you call that thing? I'm trying to think of a more pithy way of saying it. My brain's just not functioning today. That thing that you can't live without. What would you call that? You think, as long as I've got my credit card, whatever.
You're dependent on.
Yeah, but is there a phrase that I'm missing? It's like a one-word phrase. I can't think of anything. Can you guys? So maybe we'll just put can't live without. Right? So I know everything's okay because I have this. As soon as this goes away, everything is going to hell in a handbasket.
Like your vibe.
Not necessarily. A lot of people hate their vices, right? Usually end up loving your God a little too much, right? And this is the thing. C.S. Lewis, I don't know if I've mentioned this. C.S. Lewis is probably is my favorite English-speaking theologian. And if you're a big book reader at all, you do yourself a favor and pick up The Great Divide. Is one of his most marvelous pieces of theological speculation. And one of the things that he points out in there, and this is actually a very Lutheran statement, but it sounds cooler when it's coming from C.S. Lewis, that we actually usually end up making gods and false gods out of the best things in life, okay, rather than vices. So we're much more likely to make an idol out of love than we are out of like drunkenness or punching people or something like that, right? We know those things are bad. We know anger is bad, but it's the good things in life that we put our trust and hope in.
Is that because of the natural law that you talked about some last week, that even the people that don't, say, understand the traffic laws are still going to be held in by the curb?
Mm-hmm. Right.
That's it, that even if people don't acknowledge the true God, they still somehow will acknowledge or try to make false gods of that which is good.
So we should probably, usually out of something good, yeah. So everyone has a God. Like literally everyone. Even atheists who claim that there is no divine super being, they have a God in this kind of figurative sense. They have those things that they trust in, where their identity comes from, and the thing they think they can't live without. So what are some of those things? So what are some of those things, for instance, I think it's easier to work ourselves backwards. What are some of those things we think we can't live without?
Electricity.
Okay, so electricity.
Cars.
Say a lot of people make their significant other their God.
There it is. So we would just say, I think this is a big one, and kind of connected with cars and electricity. This would be things like a certain standard of living. And Christians like to do kind of a sleight of hand, where they'll say, if I got a car, 2.5 children, and a good IRA, that means God loves me. Right? If I don't have those things, and I'm sleeping in a shack, and I got credit debt up to my eyeballs, that must mean that God hates me. So that's the sleight of hand that they do. What they're actually putting their trust in, they're putting everything on, is not the true God, His words and promises, what He actually says, but in their standard of living. Significant other. Well, I think it'd be better to do this. Relationships. In general. Because it comes across very, very obviously in that, but I think even more obviously in children. And that's connected with who you are as well. Well, I'm Allison's husband and Wes's father, right? When that becomes your primary identity, that's when you start going into idolatry. Because what happens if they go away? Does your life lose its meaning?
I'd like to say no. But,
right?
It'd be tough.
And that's a gut check moment that each one of us have. And this is especially difficult for people who do lose their families, either through death or through separation. It causes them to reassess their identity and reassess what they're actually worshiping. What else?
I think that is a good measuring stick of what is your God, is what do you find your identity in.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that does say what's most important to you.
Right.
When the first thing, if the first thing I say when someone says, hey, tell me about yourself, I say, well, I'm an ag teacher. Is that what I find my identity in? Is that what my God is?
Right?
I'm a Chiefs fan, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, USA, work, go Chiefs. You want to move up here?
It wouldn't matter, I can't see anything.
Right? So say, well, I'm an American. And what is the thing that I can't live without? My freedoms. Who do I trust in to safeguard those freedoms? The government, right? Or, right, Smith & Wesson, depending on which side of the political divide you're on. And who happens to be in power at that time.
Is that your third 12-gauge reference in one Sunday? That is a record for you.
I'm working on it, man. Did you like the clay pigeon line?
There was 2 shotgun references in the service.
And I came on those on the fly. Shows how tired I am. I'm like, I got nothing. Shotguns. That's easy. You don't even have to aim. You just point. Well, I know, I chambered. Fine. A Glock. Shh, there. Chamber it.
My favorite one, Taylor Swift. That has become an idol and a god to millions of young, impressionable.
Tell me more.
They're Swifties.
How does it become their God? I'm not disagreeing with
Identity
you.
is her. They would much rather go to a Tay-Tay concert or a Tay-Tay movie or whatever than go to church.
Right.
The word of Tay-Tay means more to them than.
I'm learning new things. I've never even heard of Tay Tay.
Let him watch a reel on the.
Yeah.
Not a huge fan, but it's the cult of personality. It's
It-
any of them, but she is the absolute pinnacle of it.
Without
right
a
now.
doubt. Yeah. I think you're right. And it was, who was it before? I mean, the Beatles was an example of that kind of same thing.
They were good.
I'm not disagreeing with you. At least the band Living Colour had the audacity to actually point it out, right?
Yeah, and I don't think it's just, you say much rather than go to church, but, I'm like, I think most kids in general would rather sit home and like play their video games or watch TV or something than come to church.
Right.
Tell you what, I have one of my kids, my students, they love me and they think my class is awesome, which is great. But I have one kid in my class who would, if it was an option, who would come to school instead of stay home. I'm like 1 out of 13 that's like, does not want school to end, he wants school to go year round.
That's not James, is it?
No.
No, James started that way, and then he was like, he hit Christmas
Yeah,
break,
did.
and like,
That
oh,
was
okay, I'm done.
It's-
This just keeps going on.
No, it's Hayden.
Okay.
Hayden was crying the other day because he didn't want school to be over.
Yeah. So, what can't you live without? It could be things like video games, right? For some people, smokes, anything.
Some of these, though, I feel like what's so tough is that in and of themselves, they're not bad things.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Like, is the USA bad? Is work bad? Are the Chiefs bad? Right? Objectively, the Chiefs are not bad, right? Right? All these things are actually good in of themselves, right? And that's why, right, we don't need to be like nearly as afraid of Baal as we are need to be afraid of worshiping the Chiefs. And a great way to tell if, right, so when you have a God, the most important thing to you is that you protect the sanctity and the holiness and the specialness of that God. So what happens, is Allie a Swiftie?
No.
No. Okay, so what happens if, for instance, you start making fun of Taylor Swift to a Swiftie? They get kind of mad. They get kind of salty. Have you ever seen someone get a little too upset when the Chiefs lose? So I was born and raised during a special time in Nebraska's history. When my more formative years were in the mid-'90s, when we were, as a college football team, the most amazing thing ever. I remember the first game they lost in several years in 1996. I was in Omaha visiting my brother, and they were playing messages on the radio about grief counseling. That if you were, and specifically, They said, because the Huskers lost, if you are considering harming yourself or harming someone else, or you feel like life has no meaning, please call this number. Right? So you're looking at a statewide false god at that point. Right?
It is Nebraska, though.
Yeah, but let's be honest, if that was the breaking point back then, how easy was life if that was the...
You're
Right.
not wrong. You're not wrong. Well, part of it is, this is where entertainment comes in. This is a thing where we can't live without it. As long as I have my Chiefs, I can suffer a whole lot. Right? This is where it gets tricky, especially with things like entertainment, is we use it as our main coping tool for being able to deal with life. Right? As long as I got that, I can put up with my job and my kids and etc. Right? So, yeah, no, these things are good, right? So if we start identifying, well, I'm a Chiefs fan, right? And if our identity what if that gets threatened, right? So I'm a huge fan of diagnostics. So diagnostic question for this would be, what happens when whatever that thing is, gets threatened? So if the Chiefs go on a losing streak, what happens to your sense of well-being? If you hear a news report on the importance and necessity of gun control, what happens to your blood pressure? The other side would be if you hear someone limiting the absolute freedom of self-expression, what happens? So in that sense, both of those, right, this is the political divide. They're two sides of the same coin. It's all about rights. The question is which rights? So Democrats, Republicans are like the same. It's all worship of rights. It's just they disagree on what rights.
Where the rights come from.
No. I don't, maybe. I mean,
some do. I think
the Republicans would say that they come from God,
they would make that argument.
but they're wrong.
But say, they would say, for instance, in defending a pro-life position,
Mm-hmm.
they would say, the right to life is the fundamental right.
Yeah.
That without the right to life, that is a natural right from God, we can have no other rights.
But it's not. Never ever will you see a right to life in the scriptures.
How can you have any other rights without being alive?
There are no other rights. We as humans before God have no rights. We're completely at his mercy.
Right. Making the political argument then of
I'm uncomfortable with
right to life
making
being-
political arguments that are actually divorced from the way in which God created the universe.
okay, so we just have no rights at all in our country.
Well, we have agreed that there are certain things that the government can't take away from us based on constitutional principles.
Including our life.
Yeah, right?
Yeah. I think that's where the disagreement comes from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, you okay?
Sitting quietly.
So politics, I think, speaking of that, has become the god of lots of people. It's where they find their engagement, where they think, this is where the battle line is. If we don't do this, then everything's going to fall apart, right? So have I ever told you my conspiracy theory about how I think someone mentioned G.I. Joe?
He said you can't be you can't be too against guns because James says when he gets to stay home he watches G.I. Joe all day. And I said, you can't watch G.I. Joe and be against guns, right?
Yeah, you can, because it's a cartoon. So speaking of G.I. Joe, you remember the PSAs, public service announcements, right?
And now you know.
Right? And they would say that one half knowing is half the battle, right? So knowing. And in the context of G.I. Joe, that means the other half is guns. divided equally between red lasers and blue lasers, right? Who shoots the red lasers? G.I. Joe, right? True American heroes. Who shoots the blue lasers? Evil Cobra, who wants to take over the world and take everyone's freedoms. So red, conservative Republicans. Blue lasers, Cobra, Democrats. There you go.
And now he's half the battle, right?
Right? You're welcome for that bit of knowledge.
I guess I'm just, and this is a question I, just have just personally, is, how do you, as a Christian, have intelligent, coherent positions that align with Christianity in the political realm?
You got to be way more specific than that.
So, and what it seems to run into a lot, say, let's just use abortion as an example, that you come at it from a Christian perspective, saying that because we are designed by God, we should not kill babies.
Right.
And that the conception literally means beginning, that it is what it is. You make that type of argument, and the argument from the other side is, you can't bring religion into this. And it's like, well, that's...
So then you use common sense logic that actually happens to agree with our logic, with our viewpoints. So the example that we'll talk in greater detail when we get to the fifth commandment is an acronym called SLED. And SLED stands for size, level of development, environment, and dependence. And there is nothing different between you and an unborn human in a womb apart from your size, your level of development, your environment, and the level of dependence that you have on someone. There's nothing different from you than an unborn child than there is between you and Wes. So if you make that argument, the logical term for that is called trotting out the toddler. You say, there's nothing more different than me and Wes than there is between me and an unborn baby, and let me show you how. SLED. Do you think it's okay to kill Wes?
What?
And you say, absolutely not, because you're awesome. Right? And even if you weren't awesome, it'd still be wrong. Because human life has intrinsic value. Right? I think that's what we can say. Does human life have intrinsic value according to scriptures? Yeah, absolutely. Does that mean that you have a so-called right to life? No. Those are two different things. Okay, so those are all the things that we avoid, right? So obviously, false gods, those are the things that should be avoided for sure. So we shouldn't mingle, Buddhism, Christianity, Hinduism, Christianity, that sort of thing. Or things like either these other gods, the ones that, these kind of false gods, the ones that I think, we've talked a lot about American and what it means to be an American in idolatry. There's one that kind of cuts across humanity and human experience too. The first is money, right? So money is probably the greatest example of that's something that's very easy to idolize because it is so powerful, right? You can do so much with money. And that it's so pervasive that Jesus, speaking to a bunch of people who were living hand to mouth, day to day, said, you can't worship God and money. Right? How difficult it is for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. If he says that to people that are that poor, how much truer is that for us who have expendable income? So money is, and you all know that feeling. Paycheck comes up a little short. Maybe it was a couple years ago since you had to worry about that. You're like, I feel terrible because I have no money. guess I'll go eat a baked potato, right? Something like that. So money is often, and I'm blanking on the other one. Another one that's common for us today is our health. As Americans, right? Well, at least you got your health, right? So we are very bad at being mortal, right? Which is why I was made the comment that I did about tornadoes, right? If you die in a tornado, there's worse things to happen. Pastor Griffin was always fond of saying that. There's worse things than death. And that idolizing our health causes us to go to extreme lengths in order to keep a human being, keep ourselves alive as long as possible, regardless of the actual quality of life. There's a very good book that was actually written by an atheist about this topic called Being Mortal by Atul Gawande is his name. It's a very good treatise on that kind of thing. Okay, so who is the true God, though? He is, right, capital G God, the Father of Jesus. So that's the true God. He's the one that we take our identity from. He's the one that we trust in when things go wrong. He's the one that we can't live without. Right? If we got him in the right spot, everything is kind of shakes out pretty well. And here's the cool thing, is that God doesn't need us to defend him. Right? We always want to say, we always want to defend our gods, right, when our God comes under attack. Our God literally can't come under attack. They tried killing him one time. They tried killing his son anyway, and he came back to life, right? So they can't even kill him. So we don't even have to get angry and defend him. We don't have to defend ourselves, right? Because our God is going to take care of us. So any questions about that? I should say, why is the reason, this came up in confirmation class earlier this week, and it was a good question. It might be bringing up, why do we use capital G God? Is because it's a title, right? Which is why we have lowercase g here. It's a relational word, kind of like dad or mom, right? So when you say he is a dad, right? Dad, lowercase. But if I go up to my father and say, hey, Dad, it's capital. Because I'm using a title as a name. Does that make sense? So this isn't his personal name. He invites us to call him Father through his son, Jesus Christ. His personal name is given at the burning bush to Moses. His personal name is Yahweh. Sometimes it gets translated incorrectly as Jehovah, but that's another topic for another day. That kind of goes beyond. Maybe I'll just add a link to it about why it's not Jehovah. If you guys have ever watched Lutheran satire, ever heard of that on YouTube? Go watch Lutheran satire. It's really, really, really funny. But there's one about why it's Yahweh and not Jehovah. Okay, any questions about the first commandment? Okay, all right, moving on to the second commandment. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God. Okay, well, actually, this is a great place to actually talk about Yahweh. So what does this mean? We should fear and love God so that we do not curse, swear, use satanic arts, lie, or deceive by his name, but call upon in every trouble, pray, praise, and give thanks. Okay, so a couple of things structurally about this and how Luther wrote the explanations of the small of the commandments. Each one of the commandments after the first starts, you should fear and love God, right? We should fear and love God. So what that does is it points it back to the first commandment. And every commandment after does that same thing. We should fear and love God so that We should fear and love God so that. We should fear and love God so that. We should fear and love God so that. So this tells us kind of two things. First, if you don't have the first, nothing is pleasing to God. St. Paul says something like this in the end of Romans, where he says, everything that does not proceed from faith is sin. Meaning that, like, if you're actually like, oh, I really want to, live a good, godly life, I want to make sure I'm doing what I'm supposed to, the first thing that's most important is make sure you got the God right. You got the true God. If you don't have the true God, everything is going to get out of whack. And what I mean by that is, and the second implication of that is, if you break any commandment, you've also broken the first. So how this works, what I mean by this is, very obvious example would be the fifth commandment. Okay? So your God, for instance, is your, I'll just use someone that's not an Eric, because I already picked on you with this. Probably went a little too far with that joke. Hope I didn't know that. So a husband, his God is his wife. Okay? Something horrible happens to his wife. She dies, killed by someone, murdered. And what is he going to want to do since his God has been destroyed?
Kill that guy.
Kill the guy who did it. It's like how you assume that it's a guy that did it.
Well,
Very patriarchal of yours.
I feel like that's statistical. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't have the data.
Yeah, so you're going to be, the husband is going to be wanted to seek revenge, wanting to kill. At that point, if he does, he's going to be breaking the fifth commandment, which is you shall not kill, you shall not murder. What then is, how is he breaking the first commandment of not fearing and loving and trusting God?
Because he had his God was his wife.
Partly, but also he's going to be trying to take matters into his own hands, right? When God has in fact established certain things to deal with murderers, like namely the government, right? So this is where we're going to say that Batman is a horrible, rotten sinner, right? There's no such thing as vigilantes.
Where do you say you're gonna send that man? When you're enacting a vengeance, where do you say you're sending someone?
To hell?
Does it ever work that way?
Go on.
You're not the judge, you're not the jury, you're not the executioner, and you're definitely not God. You don't
Right.
get to choose where anybody goes.
Yeah.
You can want them to go there, but
Right. No, you're absolutely right.
there's no, you don't get to punch anyone's ticket to go any more specific after.
Exactly. No, you're absolutely right. So it ends up you not being able to deliver on what you want to do, right? And that's probably something I should say about back to the first commandment. All those other gods fail us from, Taylor Swift will get old eventually, right? And stop making banger hits after banger hit, right? Right, our God is the only one that won't fail. Your spouse will fail you, your kids will fail you, your job will fail you, you will fail yourself, right? Your health will fail. Money won't, right? Can't buy me love. Only the true God is there forever, who will not let us down. Okay, so that's how those things are two tied in together. All the other commandments are kind of built on the foundation of the first commandment. Say it that way. Okay, so the second commandment, you shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God. So you notice anything different about that word Lord there? Right? So it's all capital letters. The reason why that is, and you'll notice in your English Bibles that this is often the case, that you'll see the word Lord in all capitals, or sometimes the word God in all capitals, in certain English translations, depending on where it is. So why is that? And this is actually connected to you shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God. Specifically ties into this. Okay? So what the Hebrew actually reads is you shall not misuse the name of Yahweh your God. So that's how you spell Yahweh in Hebrew. Pardon my very bad handwriting. I know you could probably say that doesn't look like a yod at all. That looks like a Daleth, but too bad. That's what you get. Is Yahweh. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord. Misuse the name of Yahweh your God. So why do they put Lord here in our English translations instead of Yahweh? So we talked about the biblical history of the people of Israel, right, and how they failed at being God's chosen people over and over and over again, and they were just really, really, really bad at it. Eventually, and God would then step in and discipline them in some sometimes pretty brutal ways because of their sin and their rejection of Him. And eventually they said, all right, guys, we're sick of getting smacked in the nose here. We need to take this faith thing seriously and actually start following God's commandments. We're going to take it super seriously. That we're going to get so seriously that we're going to make a whole bunch of extra commandments that will actually keep us from breaking the big commandments. So that if we invent these other commandments, we'll break one of these before we break the big ones. And one of the obvious ones had to do with you shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God. They said, it's really hard to misuse something if you never use it. So around the year 300 BC, the people of God stopped using the name Yahweh entirely. As a culture, they said, we're never going to say that word out loud ever again. And the quickest way to offend a Jewish person today is to use that name out loud. They themselves will still not say this name out loud. So what do? Like when they're reading the scriptures and they come across this name, because this name is literally all over the scriptures. Especially, obviously, it's all over the Old Testament, which is written in Hebrew. So what do? What they do is, as they're reading along and they come across this name, instead of saying Yahweh, they switch it. They substitute it with another word. And that word is Adonai, which means Lord. Okay? So we, in our English translations, and there's some good reason for this, have kept that. And when we translate it from Hebrew into English, and we come across the name Yahweh, we don't actually put the name Yahweh. We put the word Lord or the word God, depending on the context. Okay? So every time you see the word Lord, know that in all capitals, know that that's actually God's personal name there in the Bible. Right? We think that we certainly should use God's name correctly, right? Because you're missing the point if you're like, well, we're just never going to use it, right? You're completely missing the point of the commandment. Not supposed to misuse it, but actually use it correctly. Okay? So any questions about that?
I feel like a lot of people read that, they're just like, oh, I just shouldn't say, GD or whatever, and kind of leave it at that. But I feel like there's more going on.
They're not wrong there. Okay, so we'll get into the explanation real quick. We can cover it. What does this mean? We should fear and love God so that, and then we notice that here we do not do some stuff, but we do some stuff. So as Luther wrote the explanations, there's a negative and a positive. So there's a bunch of stuff that we avoid and a bunch of stuff we actually do. Right? So there's actually a positive side, like this is the part that shapes our lives and how we live as Christians. So what do we not do? Curse, swear, use satanic arts, lie or deceive by His name. Okay, so none of this has to do with salty language that you wouldn't use around your grandmother. Okay, that's not in the purview of this commandment. What does it mean when we say curse? Is what you said, right? You don't say, to hell with you, or, GD it, or GDU, right? Because at that point, we're actually asking God to curse someone or something, to send it to hell, and we're asking God to do something that he doesn't want to do, right? He wants all people to be saved and come to the knowledge of the truth. And when we're saying, damn you, that's no good, right? So that's what that looks like. So cursing would be specifically that. Swearing, also not four-letter words. This would be like, I swear to God, period, would be that. A lot of this has to do with actually like recognizing that our God's like a really big deal. And sometimes we use I swear to God really, really flippantly. Like, I swear to God, those are the best brownies I ever ate. Right? It's like, maybe you don't need to call upon the creator of the entire universe to attest to the goodness of the brownies that you just ate. Maybe you can just say, man, those were really good brownies. Right? Something like that. In kind of bigger situations where people take vows or oaths, we do this for the sake of other people, so that they know we're serious, that kind of thing. So like wedding vows would come into that regard, oaths of office, that sort of thing. But we want to live our lives in such a way that we don't actually ever have to swear for people to take us seriously and believe that we're telling the truth. Like, I swear to God I didn't do it, right? Maybe you've heard that once or twice before from your daughter. I know I've already heard it from my children. You just wait, Amber. Alyssa will say it at some point. So we don't swear unless we are going to, like, we're in a court of law and we're there to defend our neighbor, right? That's appropriate. I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God. Okay, use satanic arts. This would be magic, but not like the Harry Potter kind of magic, but like real actual magic, right? So you don't have to throw away your Gryffindor scarf or your autographed novels, autographed by Harry Potter. Someone asked me the other day, do you have an autographed copy of the Bible? I went, I don't know how to answer that question. Autographed by who? The Holy Spirit? So satanic arts, this is something that comes across in the Old Testament especially quite a bit, where it talks about what magic in reality is about is trying to figure out the future and to make it come out for you in the positive. So this would be things like, in the Bible, astrology would be an example of that, right? I'm going to try and figure out how the stars are going to affect me in the future. What's my horoscope for today? Psychics, reading tea leaves, getting your head read, crystal balls, that sort of thing. Even so far as what is called in the Old Testament is necromancy, which is talking to dead people, right? So seances, Ouija boards, that kind of thing. Scripture is pretty clear on this. You don't mess around with stuff. Instead, you simply trust that God's going to be able to take care of you in the future. Other magic is specifically connected to using God's name, because in the ancient world, they believed that God had that every god had a public name and then a secret name, and that if you knew that secret name of the god, you could order that god to do the stuff that you wanted him to do. Okay, so. We actually have artifacts where it's like it's called a curse bowl, where you would have this little bowl and it would have a magic inscription, so it would have the God's sacred name and then what you'd ask him to do. And the one we actually have is like so and so God, may my neighbor's cattle die in the field and may his testicles fall off. Is literally what the curse is, right? And then you burn an offering in that bowl, and that's supposed to, you're commanding the God to do it, right? So in the same way, we don't dare to command God to do something he doesn't want to do.
So the Bible prohibits doing satanic arts, necromancy, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Not because it's silly, but because you're messing with things you don't understand.
Right. Well, and I would say because we should, first and foremost, we simply trust God to take care of us. But yeah, for sure. We believe that there is a spiritual reality behind this physical reality, and you fit into one of two camps, evil or good in that spiritual reality. You have, and the good side specifically says, don't look for help here. And if we go here, chances are, who are we talking to? Demons, right? So yeah, don't mess with it. They're a lot bigger, gnarlier, stronger than you.
So aliens, just demons.
Yeah, maybe aliens. I don't know. I am undecided on that. So we don't lie or deceive by his name. So again, we don't. This is especially saying like, oh, I'm a Christian, you can trust me, right? So Jesus fish on a used car salesman sign, right? That one on North, that's on Chestnut, right? As a joke.
I get that, but on the other serious side, when you invade two countries and then you say, I answer to a higher power, how does that work on the second commandment?
Tell me more. Specifically, who are you talking about?
Bush, too.
Yeah, right?
Answer to a higher power.
Is that a godly thing that he did, invading other people? Not so much.
That statement was the only part that was wrong, though.
Could be. No, we can debate that other issue, but yeah, that he answers to a higher power.
Man, he really didn't do anything wrong. We do that every day, but I answer to a higher power was where he kind of stepped in the puddle.
Right. Yeah, because you'd need God to sort of say, yeah, you need to invade those people.
He didn't say that a lot.
Yeah, when that's your trump card, you can't disagree with me because if you're disagreeing with me, you're disagreeing with God. That's a very. If you ever run across someone like that, there's some.
You guys make an assumption that that's the power he's talking to, though?
Well, knowing George W.
Well, how do you know that there's something? He just had a conspiracy. Maybe they had a different power.
They talk about Texas.
Yeah.
So, pastors are especially bad at this. So be on guard on pastors who say things like, God put it on my heart that we need to do this thing. Or any Christian who says that. Because if you ever have a Christian that says, God put it on my heart that we need to do this, I need to do this. What happens if you disagree with them? You're now disagreeing with God. How dare you, unbeliever.
Right. It's a lot of power that you will.
It is. You got to be very, very careful. I'm very cognizant of that all the time. Because power, along with money, is like the greatest idol there is. Get drunk on it.
Isn't there some spots in Paul's writings where he's like, okay, this is what I was supposed to share with you, and now here's my thoughts, right? Like he, even with the
apostolic authority
that he had, still wanted to make the distinction of, I still think what I'm saying is right, but I'm not going to invoke God here.
Yes. Yes. It's in 1 Corinthians. I can't remember exactly what he's talking about. I think he's talking about marriage and sex, but I don't remember what. It's like, what would you know? Celibate.
Priests are a weird bunch.
Wow.
There it came. Let's put a pin in that and talk about that later, right? I have a very good friend, someone that I trust just more than life itself. He's been gifted the spiritual gift of celibacy. And he's a Lutheran pastor. He is convinced that a lot of the child abuse that happens is not because of forced celibacy, but because of power dynamics. And I think it'll.
An 8-hour discussion on this one.
I know, right?
There's a lot that goes into
So let's put a pin in that. That gets beyond the catechism. Let's have an iced tea sometime, cold beverage, and talk about that. Okay? I think I would actually enjoy that. As weird as that sounds, that's the kind of stuff I enjoy talking about. But that's what we'll call it good for today. We'll start. We'll finish off the next part. So I'll just put a note here. Start here for next time.